Welcome to Inside Voices, a well-read magazine, Between the Pages podcast. I'm Robert Gwaltney, here with my host and good friend, Jeffrey Dell Lofton. And we're both super excited to enter into conversation today with award-winning author, James Wade. Welcome, James.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, fellas. I really appreciate this. I love the podcast. I feel honored and privileged to be here. And I gotta say, Robert, the last time you and I were on a Zoom together, we were talking from inside my refrigerator because that's how hot it was in Texas. My phone was overheating. So I just thought that I would let you know that right now my phone is stacked on 11 jigsaw puzzles because we fled Texas where we came to New Mexico, higher elevation to get out of the heat. Well, now we've got hailstorms. It's knocked out the internet. So I'm doing this on the phone. And of course, I don't have
Oh my
a
God.
tripod or anything like that. And so we're stacked up on some jigsaw puzzles right now. And I just thought it's perfectly fitting. Every time I talk to you, it's just some kind of weird thing with my phone. So I love it.
Well, I think that just means that you are resilient, and you can
It's the
adapt, in a wide variety of circumstances. To piggyback on to what James was saying, it was extremely hot. So, uh, James has a family. He and I were zooming, just catching up a couple of weeks ago. He didn't want to wake his children, so he was in the garage in Texas. And at one point, he just vanished, and it's because his phone overheated. So he had to cool it off in the outside refrigerator, and that's how we finished our conversation.
Perfect.
it's the links that I'll go to talk to you, Robert. That's what it
Oh,
is.
thank you, thank you so much. Well, James, before we kick off our conversation, I'm going to share a little bit about you with our listeners. So, folks, James Wade is the award winning author of Beast of the Earth, All Things Left Wild, and Rivers Sing Out. He's the youngest novelist to win two Spur Awards from the Western Writers of America and the recipient of MPIBA's prestigious Reading the West Award. James' work has appeared in Southern Literary Magazine, the Bitter Oleander, Writer's Digest, and numerous additional publications. James lives and writes in the Texas Hill Country with his wife and children. His forthcoming novel, Hollow Out the Dark, releases August 20th, 2024. Jeffrey, I'm going to toss it on over to you to kick off our conversation.
Thank you. And welcome, James. I'm so excited to get a chance to talk with you finally.
Yeah, same here. Same here. I have admired you from afar and love the splash that Red Clay Susie made. And congratulations to you, by the way. So am I talk? So has this ever happened that where we have a podcast that has back-to-back Georgia Author of the Years? Is that? I mean, this
It's
is this
happened
is too
now.
cool, man.
Yeah, we're so blessed and honored to be the second Georgia Author of the Year on this podcast. So Robert, of course, being 2023's Georgia Author of the Year. So
Yeah,
It's
y'all have a great batting average, guys.
we're so excited about that. We're two Georgia boys. We grew up very similarly. We
yeah,
found one another, in the midst of our debut journeys, and we've just been fast friends ever since. Much like, James, you and I having the opportunity to get to know one another first through sort of social media and being able to connect in our literary community. So it's exciting to have these three Southern boys, on a podcast together.
yeah. And speaking of that, your latest novel, Hollow Out the Dark, your fourth novel actually, is described as Gothic adventure set against a Depression era landscape. So would you set it up for us? Will you tell us about it?
I'll do my best. It's crazy. You write 80,000 words, you spend a year or two with a novel, and somebody asks you to summarize it, and your mind goes blank. I guess that's why they have the marketing folks, and I'm sure that whatever they, whatever they wrote on the jacket copy is probably a lot more appealing. But no, it's a little bit of a classic setup to where our two main characters are a bootlegger and a Texas Ranger. So, you have that either side of the law dynamic, and of course that lends itself to kind of these moral conundrums, right? And so basically these moral dilemmas, there's not a right or wrong answer, but the novel is a little bit of a meditation on the responsibility that we have, the moral obligation that we have to not just our families or ourselves, but to kind of society at large. And so our two main characters, Jesse Cole, who is a World War I veteran and a bootlegger, and then Eamon Atkins, who's a Texas Ranger. They both kind of live by this certain moral code. It's a little different, but both, what you could call kind of honorable men. But then as they get drawn into this underworld of criminals, of corrupt law enforcement, of corporations that put profit over humanity and those type of things, they kind of go down this rabbit hole, and all of a sudden the world starts to really bump up against their moral code, right? And so then it's kind of, the question becomes, well, what are you gonna do about it? And when does your duty to your family overlap or butt up against your duty to your family and your loved ones? And I think, in a lot of ways, this question is kind of as relevant as it's ever been. Certainly, I think most folks would understand how we're kind of inundated on a daily basis with the world just being on fire, right? And the question always comes up, either directly, indirectly, or sometimes, I mean, for me, I just ask it a lot of times of myself. I think, a lot of people that want to be good people, feel that way. And it's just, what are we going to do? What are you going to do, right? What are you going to do to make the world a better place? What are you going to do to help ease suffering and all of these things? And so, yeah, how does that coexist, right, with responsibility to family? And when I wrote this book, I have two children. I had just become a dad. And all of a sudden, these things I had never really considered, right, that had never really truly been a priority to me, all of a sudden they started to tug at me a little bit, right? Like I could go to the other side of the world and build water pipe ditches, right? And I could know that I'm doing some good in the world and that I'm helping. But then how do my children feel about that? How does my wife feel about that? And so that's kind of what our two characters are going through. And then of course the secondary theme, which plays off the title, Hollow Out the Dark, is just it's about loss of innocence, but more so the aftermath of a loss of innocence, which is, okay, the world is not what we thought it was going to be maybe when we were young. Well, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to just kind of curl up and let the bad things overwhelm us, or do we turn a blind eye to those horrors and just kind of ignore it? Or is there another path forward, kind of where we acknowledge the calamity and the state of the world, but we still find our own space in it, where we can live proudly, if not peacefully, and move forward in that way. And so anyway, these are all things that were just on my mind. And since writing is therapy, this is kind of what came out, whether I originally wanted it to or not. But that's the setup, and that's why they don't let me write the jacket copy, because they said all that in like 300 words, and I just I'm sorry. It was a pleasure to be on the podcast. We're out of time. I appreciate it.
We need more words, not fewer, so it's okay. Thank you.
James and Jeffrey, don't you think it's much easier to write a novel than to distill a novel down into just a few paragraphs?
Yes.
I mean,
absolutely.
It's awful.
I know a lot of short story writers, and they say, "Oh my goodness, we could never write a novel. We could never do a project that big." And I'm looking at them going, "I could never do a short story that the way that you guys do." I mean, I've written short stories, but the way that they're able to take these ginormous themes and narrow them down into 1,000 words, 2,000 words, or even more so, a poet. There's so many great poets out there that just in a stanza can make you feel the enormity sometimes of what you even feel with a novel. And so, hats off to those people. But no, I need all the pages. I need all the space.
Agreed. Same. Well, so you mentioned, James, this loss of innocence, and that really is a theme that's shared, in your first three novels. With Hollow Out the Dark, through Jesse Cole. I mean, you talked a little bit about what you explore by way of human condition, but specifically through him, what did you set out to say, about the human condition in Hollow Out the Dark?
Yeah, I love that question, Robert, because Jesse does have similar afflictions, similar circumstances as other characters that I've written about, just in part because I gravitate towards and love that loss of innocence theme. But where Jesse differs, and what I found the most fascinating about writing his character, is we get to see, we pick up in the novel with Jesse. The reader meets him. He's already lost his innocence. He's been in the war. He's lost a brother. He's seen the darkness that's out there. And we see the life that he's built in order to kind of sustain himself. And then all of a sudden he gets this, I don't know if you want to call it a second chance or what, but he all of a sudden has this opportunity when he's thrown back together with his first love, the woman that was really, his passion, right? And in that we get a glimpse as readers of who Jesse used to be when he was younger, when he wasn't so cynical, when he, had more zest and optimism for the world, and he feels that as well. And so then the question becomes, what's that worth to him, right? What's he willing to sacrifice to actually hang on to it this time, and not let her go? And I thought that was fascinating because it's almost like an extreme version of a midlife crisis or something. He kind of thought that his life was completely played out, and then all of a sudden, here we go, and he gets this second chance, and then that kind of kicks his part of the story into overdrive because now he's fighting to hang on to that.
James, another theme is faith, which is so closely tied to loss of innocence, I think, and longing for it, finding it, losing it. It's a leitmotif that runs throughout so much of your writing. Will you tell us more about faith as a theme in your writing?
I think that's another great question, and I think it's a tough question. My writing, much like y'all's own, is it's southern, it's rural, it's the people and the culture that we're exploring, the people and the culture that we come from. It's everything almost is seen through the lens of faith, life, death, morality, all of these things, and for me, I'm just fascinated by that. I grew up Southern Baptist. I moved away from religion as I got older, but that actually kind of increased my fascination with it, because there's nothing. I mean, if you're a person of any faith, any religion, there's nothing that's more important than that, right? I mean, that's and to me, that is there's such power in that, right? Both good and bad, uh, but the characters that I write about, pretty much to your point, Jeffrey, in all my novels, but certainly in Hollow Out the Dark as well, is there's suffering there, there's pain there, there's loss, there's all these things that they're not so much concerned with the existential question of, oh, is there God? Is there not? They're just more like, hey, we're hurting. Why? Like, what's the purpose, right? And I think that longing is what drives people to faith in the first place, right? There has to be a reason that this is happening. There has to be a reason that I, am put in this situation. And again, I'm a lot better at asking questions than I am at giving the answers in my novels. And so I don't really set out to answer that question in Hollow Out the Dark, but certainly, the characters ask it. I want to ask it. I want the readers to think about it. I'm not trying to preach to anybody. I'm certainly not trying to convert or deconvert anyone, but I think that is it's just such a timeless theme of humanity. I mean, it's Cormac McCarthy famously said that he really kind of, I'm not gonna say look down, but he just didn't really care about books or writers that didn't deal with life and death. And while I certainly think there's room for every type of book, that's not what interests me or excites me as a writer or a reader. Like, I do want that life and death. I do want that, kind of an all-encompassing thematic novel, and I don't think you can do that without addressing faith, just because it's such a large part of our world. Again, particularly in the rural South. I mean, you just can't avoid it, or without being untrue to your characters and untrue to your setting.
Agreed. Three Southern authors, three fellas raised Southern Baptists here together today. We turned out all right.
We did. I'm sure the pastors would all be proud.
Absolutely. So New York Times bestselling author William Kent Krueger says this: James Wade is a poet of the dark. With gorgeous lyricism, he writes of men and women caught in the bleakest of circumstances and the choices that must be made when desperate times require desperate measures. Now, am a great fan, James, of authors composing dark themes lyrically. I mean, were you always this writer, or has your voice developed over time?
I think it's a little of both. I think that I've always, like you, I've always been drawn to kind of those darker themes, and especially when they're painted with a lyrical brush, especially when they're um, made approachable or digestible in a way that's just beautiful. And I think there's not only something attractive about that, but there's something kind of courageous about when a writer or a person looks at the darkness, looks at the things they fear, and says, you know what, I see you, I know you, and I'm now going to turn you into poetry. And while I try to do that, I don't always succeed, but that's always kind of the goal, and that's what I admire the most in other writers, and William Kent Kruger being one of those writers. And of course, that quote cost me at least like half a year's mortgage. But yeah, I don't know. I think that when I start, as far as the voice goes, when I started writing, I wrote all kinds of short stories with all different voices. I wrote certainly rural gothic. I wrote some kind of things that were along the horror and fantasy line. I had a piece published in Jersey Devil Press, which is sort of more of an absurdist literary magazine, and yeah, I just kind of dabbled in everything, in part because I was reading a little of everything and trying to find what really, like what really turned me on, and like what really got the inspiration juices flowing, and when I landed here, where is here? I mean, my first novel was a Western. The next one was a modern day crime novel, and then this is historical. So I'm still kind of a little all over the map. But I think the thing that has stuck is a little bit of that the darker the darker themes, the darker voice. But I like that. I can see how some people would be like, oh, that's very depressing. But I think that's how, and this is an old cliche, but that's how the light gets through, right? You need both. You need the dark and the light to really appreciate one or the other. So yeah, I'm a poet of the dark. Just listen to William Kent Kruger. No,
I love that.
I don't know if I buy any of that, but it just feels, again, to go back to just wanting to be truthful, and I think for me, this, if I'm going to have if I'm going to write something and feel like it's true and feel like it's honest and feel like it's real, then I have to include those dark things, because that's part of me, that's part of life, at least the way I see it, and that's okay. Like I said, let's face it down. Let's have the courage to look at it and talk about it.
Agreed. I often say, I'm happiest writing in dark places. And I don't know, there's something sort of, I don't know, very freeing about it. There's a poignancy, I think, too, and
Yeah.
there's a beauty writing in those dark places. I want to just read a few paragraphs of your prologue for this book, and it's stunning. You are the king of beautifully rendered prologues. I'm always just such a fan. And so for those listeners who've not had an opportunity to experience your writing, I'm just going to ask that everyone indulge me for a moment. East Texas, January 1932. The land is in winter. An equable autumn has given way to a barbarous cold. The country's burnished bronze laminate has been in an instant discarded, replaced without ceremony by bleak, illiberal desolation. Only the pines hold. The rest of the trees that cover the high ground and hollows are laid bare, exposed to the wanton woes of a harsh and merciless inclemency. It is a wet cold, humid and piercing, a mud cold, the locals name it, as the ground turns to sludge and mire and stays so for the duration of the season. Blood red clay encrusts the earth and is tracked onto porch boards and into near empty shops, and is tracked along creek beds and into the darkest coves of every creature, man and beast alike. Isn't that just something? And he references red clay, Jeffrey.
I know. I know.
Robert, you could make a phone book sound good. So I don't, I can't. I love hearing you read anything that I write, but I can't take it. I can't take it honestly, because you're just such a good reader. You have such a compelling voice that I feel like I could give you my emails like to my kids' preschool or something, and you would make them sound literary and lyrical.
Well, thank you. But anyone that reads that is going to feel exactly the same way and going to experience the the same level of craft and lyricism in your work.
Such a
I
beautiful sense.
appreciate that.
Yeah, the sense of place is just so gorgeous, which is,
So, go ahead, Jeffrey. I'm sorry.
it's just another, hallmark of good Southern writing is a strong sense of place. It's beautiful.
Right. And Jeffrey said you had me at red clay. So secrets, revelations, and sinewy twists of plot abound in Hollow Out the Dark. I read in another interview that you've outlined everything that you've ever written, and yet you never follow an outline. Let's talk a little bit about that.
I mean, it's not on purpose, honestly. I wish I'd love to plan a novel. I'd love to have an outline and then just be able to stick to it. That way I kind of know what I'm doing when I sit down every day, but it hasn't worked out that way yet. I think that when I start writing, I have a very loose outline, have ideas in my head of what I think the themes are going to be or where I think the story's going to go. And, you get into it and you start kind of the characters or the narrative or something about the theme. It starts to shift in a way that you're going, oh, well, this is not what I anticipated. Okay, you can either fight against that, kind of go against the current a little bit, or you can let it see, where it takes you and try to make the best of it. And so far, I've only done the latter, but I don't mind it. I've said before, probably in that same interview you referenced, that outlines are like bones, and bones can break. I don't think that if you make an outline, I mean, it's suggestions. It's a guidepost. It's where you're at that time. It, yeah. As much as I would like to just outline a story, write it chronologically, which would be great. I've never been able to do that. I'm always skipping around and writing scenes toward the end, or maybe I'll go middle and then beginning and then end, or vice versa. You know, I don't think, I mean, I just turned in the manuscript for my fifth novel. I have yet to be able to stick to any of that. And so I think at some point you just kind of have to look yourself in the mirror and be like, this is who I am as a writer, and kind of let the chaos ensue. And that's okay. If that's the way that I have to do it, then I'll keep doing it that way. But oh, how I long for the day where I can just have an outline, like maybe up on the wall, and okay, I'm gonna write chapter 3 today because I wrote chapter 2 yesterday, and then chapter 4 will be tomorrow, and buddy, we're cooking. But I don't see that happening anytime in the near future.
Well,
James,
you have a process and it works for you.
yeah, so that's the important thing. But James, do you ever sort of go back to your outline and update it based on what you've written since you last, created the outline? Do you ever go back, or is it once you create that sort of loose outline, just go writing and never go back to the outline?
I mean, it depends on your official definition, right, of outline. Because I have you know a billion Word docs open at all times, it seems like, and I'll go over to one and I'll just kind of jot down some notes, right, that I've thought about but I haven't written anywhere, and I need to get them down in case I forget or something, and I'll just say, maybe this should happen, or maybe he should feel this way, and so, like, really the outline just kind of splatters all over the place in all these different Word docs. Sometimes in the actual manuscript itself, I've turned stuff into editors before, and they've gone, "Hey, on page 246, you've got this line that says, that says insert more something here," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, sorry about that." But yeah, I mean, it takes on a life of its own. It really does, and I try to be disciplined and I try to be organized. I can only imagine what would happen if I wasn't trying, because certainly if you look at it from the outside, you would question if I was trying. But I don't know. That's part of the excitement a little bit too, right? It's what do they say? Like that creative people have messy desks or whatever. Like I don't know if I buy that, or maybe I'm not creative enough because I don't like chaos around me, like in the physical space. But chaos in my head, chaos on the page, or the multiple pages, multiple documents. I think that might be where my comfort zone is a little bit. At least so far. I don't know. Like I said, I do long for the day where I can just calmly and chronologically sit down, write a few pages. Okay, I did what I was supposed to do today. I know what I'm supposed to do tomorrow, and all that.
Well, as Robert said, if it works, don't fix it. So, um,
Exactly.
James, I understand that you had quite the career before your writing career took off, right? I think you were a journalist, a legislative director, a lobbyist. Will you tell us how those parts of your life earlier on influence your writing now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, all of our experiences influence everything, right? Every book we've ever read has influenced us probably in some way as writers. The way we grew up, all of those things. And so for me, even though obviously I didn't know it at the time, all these different kind of occupational and professional experiences, they've absolutely found their way back into the writing. In part just because it alters the way you think a little bit too. I mean, I got the job as a night reporter for the Lofton Daily News when I was 18 years old. So, obviously I knew everything there was to know about everything because I was 18. And all of a sudden I'm going out to fatal car accidents, to meth lab busts, to, we have murders, child abuse cases, all this honestly just terrible stuff, right? But you see that and you see the darkness that's kind of in the heart of men, but at the same time, because it's your job, you follow these stories and you kind of start to see certainly not both sides of whatever the bad action was, but you start to see um where everything went wrong for these folks, right? They come from poverty. Maybe they come from an abusive situation themselves. Maybe they had terrible things happen that kind of knocked them off course. I mean, it just there's so much nuance to people, and my goodness, do we live in a time where nuance is not sexy? Nobody cares about that. We want extremes. We want black and white. We want all or nothing. And that's not the truth in my opinion. I think the truth is usually a lot more gray, a lot more nuanced than that. And so anyway, kind of walking in those circles, in the political landscape here in Texas, right? I got to work with folks from both sides of the aisle, and the people that I thought were great were not maybe as great as I thought. The people I thought that were terrible were maybe not as terrible as I thought. And then there were others that were, right? I mean, there were people that did wonderful things through legislation, or at least tried to, and then there were people who did terrible things, or at least tried to. And all of that it's part of your worldview in a way, and of course that influences the writing. But then there are little things too that are maybe a little more fun, right? Like dialogue and cultural influences, little ticks that a character may have, or sayings, or you know jokes, or any of that stuff, right? That's kind of the fun stuff. And as you guys know, I mean, it's hard to beat some true Southern characters, when it comes to just over the top dialogue and flashy sayings and all that stuff. And so that's a part of it too. But I think the biggest thing is that just I've always wanted my characters to feel well-rounded. Like, I think no one is really all good, no one's really all bad. And almost everyone has something about them that you can, if not empathize with, then at least sympathize. And so that's kind of how I approach the page, and pull from past experiences. And yeah, I mean, all those things, Jeffrey, like I don't know. I think when I was doing each one of them, I thought I was going to do it forever. You know what I mean? And that's kind of a fascinating take on its own, right? Is like nothing matters as much to us as the things that are happening in the moment, right? The questions we have right now. And you want those answers, and it just I don't know. it's just fascinating to look back at on that. And so I was glad you asked that question, because I haven't really thought about that. I haven't thought about how those things impacted me, not just as a writer, but again, like kind of as a thinker, and shaped my worldview a little bit. So
Thank you.
So I think you stated earlier in our conversation that sometimes when you're writing, you have these questions about life and the world, and when you set out to write a novel, what would you say that Hollow Out the Dark has taught you? What writing this book at the end was all said and done? What do you know more of that you didn't know before?
I think a lot of times I face make my characters face these questions, because it's just questions I have, right? I'm like, listen, if I have to go through it, you have to go through it too. And for Hollow Out the Dark, as with most of my novels, like there are, again, the existential elements. There's kind of like the purpose. There's the morality. There are all these things, but really, if I pull back, it's not so much Hollow Out the Dark or any other novel. It's writing itself, and I think you guys probably know exactly what I mean when it's the ultimate teacher of patience, discipline, maybe, probably. There's the whole you got to have thick skin type thing. There's the putting yourself out there. Like you have to have enough confidence and enough ego to write in the first place. But then as soon as you're done writing, you have to pull that ego back in, and realize that it belongs now to the world and not to you. And there's all those things, and it's just so therapeutic that in a way it's terrifying. I mean, you're sitting there, you're alone at your desk for 99% of what we do, and you're asking yourself like, there's no buffer there. It's like you're mining the innermost entirety of your being and seeing what comes out. And yeah, it can be a delicate prospect. And but then it teaches you ultimately to face those fears, and to deal with them, and to move forward. And that is what Hollow Out the Dark is about. That's what hollowing out the dark is okay. Yes, there's this thing that's going on that's tough, or there are these people that's suffering, or you're suffering, or your loved ones, or whatever it is. You still have to move forward. You have to find a way to push forward. And I don't mean in kind of that naive way, right? Like everything's rainbows and sunshine. Like you acknowledge it, you admit it, you say, this is the circumstance I'm in, but I will still go forward. I will find a way to do this, but do it truthfully and do it honestly, and with my eyes wide open. And I think that's the overall theme of the novel. And I think it's something that writing it kind of helped me realize, and then helped me reaffirm over and over again, because it's tough, guys. Like look, when everything's going good, it is easy to be a good person. It's easy to be a happy person. It's easy to go, you know what? I feel zen like today. I feel very centered. I feel like everything is great in the universe. Yeah, that's easy, man. But what happens when everything goes wrong? I used to talk about, like, you tell yourself like, all right, I'm going to go on this diet, and I'm going to work out, and I'm going to meditate, and I'm going to be happy and positive today. And you decide to do all these things, and you get started, and almost immediately something just ridiculous blows up all the plans that you have. Okay, well, can you stick to that now? Right? Can you find that discipline now? Can you find that motivation, even when it's not easy, even when it's not right there in front of you, when you have to really dig for it and dig deep? And that's tough. I mean, you got to have grace with yourself too, if you can't always do that. But yeah, I think that's, for me, that's kind of my current life philosophy, right? Is just move forward even when it's tough, and try to stick to your code.
Well, James, speaking of moving forward, what's next for you?
So I'm on vacation. I'm not supposed to be working, but I have snuck in a few hours each day, because I've got some ideas percolating around. I just turned in the manuscript for my fifth novel, which is tentatively titled "Narrow the Road." I'm excited to get to work with my publisher, Blackstone Publishing, on that. And we've got the Hollow Out the Dark tour is coming up. We're going to be traveling all over Texas, all over the South. I'm going to be coming to Georgia. I'm so excited. It's gonna be my first time to do some book events in Georgia. I'll be with Robert at Foxtel's bookshop, and then also at the writing conference the next
Yeah.
day at
Our
what is it?
Broadleaf Writers Association.
Broadleaf. Thank you. Yes, my goodness. Yes, Broadleaf. We're gonna do that the next day. When is all that, Robert? It's in September, right?
Yeah, it's September. It'll be here before you know it.
I really will. It really will. So anyway, we've got dates all the way out through November, I think, for the Hollow Out the Dark tour and doing some really cool stuff. And which, if anybody wants to follow along with that or see if I'm coming to a town near you, you can go to jameswadewriter.com. We're going to put a tour schedule up there, or you can follow me at James Wade Writer on Instagram. I'll be sharing all the fun stuff there. But yeah, that's kind of, it's a weird thing because you deliver a manuscript and then you have one coming out. I mean, Hollow Out the Dark, I haven't thought about that in like a year because I've been so focused on Narrow the Road. But now, as we're doing the tour for Hollow Out the Dark, we'll be doing the edits for Narrow Out the Road, and then I'll have to start the next novel. And we'll see what I can pull out. And like I said, I don't know what it'll look like, but it'll involve something probably that I'm scared of, and I'll just have to reach inside and see what I can pull out.
Great.
Well, James Wade, my friend, we are at the end of our time together, and it has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you guys are marvelous. I had to bite my tongue a million times to not turn this around and just start peppering y'all with questions. So I might start a podcast just to have y'all on. It'll be a one episode, one season, one episode podcast, special edition, just so I can talk to y'all about y'all's writing, just because I love it so much.
Well, we will be there.
You'll be there.
All right, nice.
So, Hollow Out the Dark makes its way into the world in August. It'll be here before you know it. Pre-orders are out there for you. So, we recommend that maybe you reach out to your favorite independent bookstore. But his book can be found where all books are sold. So, until next time, gentle listeners, for Inside Voices, I'm Robert Gwaltney.
And I'm Jeffrey Dale Lofton. And remember, to be creative is to be courageous.